Now there's no way I can talk to you about the technical basics of photography without at some point talking about cameras. Now there are several different types of camera out there and obviously a massive different range of price points. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, so in this video and next week's video I'm going to talk you through some of the main types you're going to come across and what's good and bad about them. Now lots of what I'm going to talk about is slightly subjective. I've been a professional photographer for more than 20 years, and in that time I've obviously developed preferences and habits and ways I like to work that I like to see reflected in my cameras. I've got a very set idea of what cameras should and shouldn't do, and that does sort of colour my views slightly. So bear in mind, what I think is great might not necessarily be the same for yourself, but I'll try and be as objective as I can. The most important thing to remember though is that, like all equipment, cameras are not actually that important. Technical stuff, camera stuff, equipment, this lens, this brand, that brand, generates a huge amount of noise and heat on the internet. And it's all pretty irrelevant, really. As long as your camera and your equipment generally does the job it's supposed to do, it's irrelevant next to your own technical and craft skill and your creativity. That's where really good photography will come from. Now in this particular video, which I recorded a few years ago, I don't mention mirrorless cameras. I only refer to DSLRs as being the more advanced professional cameras out there. That's because when I filmed this video, mirrorless cameras were still a little bit behind the curve and in my opinion weren't quite up to scratch. I do cover them in the next video, but suffice to say, if you've got a decent mirrorless camera, you'll be absolutely fine covering everything I'm talking about in this course. So don't worry if you feel like I've missed you out. And remember, above all, the best camera is the camera you've got with you. There is no point buying something very expensive, super specified, great big heavy covered in accessories if you leave it at home or leave it in the car all the time. You are far better off with something smaller, lighter, that's less specified, but you actually take it and take pictures with it. And with that in mind, in this video we're going to talk about smartphones and their pros and cons, and the same for compact cameras. You know all the YouTube bit by now. This is part of a multi-part course that I've put together that's all the basic technical knowledge you'll need to know to start out in photography. I'm posting a new video every week on YouTube, usually on a Friday. There's an accompanying blog post on my blog at photosmodger.com. Obviously subscribe if you want updates, like it if you like it, comment and I'll try and help you out. Meanwhile, let's get started with different types of cameras. Let's talk about different types of cameras. Now it can get very, very confusing because that's a camera. We're all familiar with what that sort of thing looks like. The camera in there, that's a camera, this big plasticky thing's a camera, and that's a camera. Now, it shouldn't be too confusing because at the end of the day, the best camera is the camera you've got with you. Okay, and a lot of the time that means it's going to be something small and portable like your camera phone or like a compact or maybe a bit bigger, something like this. There's no point having the best camera in the world if you don't actually take it with you and use it. So, as I always stress with equipment, don't get too caught up in, oh, what must be the best thing, what's the most expensive I can get? Get something that works and stick with it. I've owned dozens of cameras over the years. That's no exaggeration. I mean, having been doing photography as long as I have, literally dozens of cameras. And the best, most versatile cameras going for everybody from amateurs through to professionals like myself are SLRs like this. Okay, I'll go into more detail as to what different camera types do in just a minute, but essentially this is the one that you're aiming for. This will be the most useful thing for the course. If you haven't got an SLR like that, a compact like this that will allow you to do manual settings is a pretty good second best. Camera phones, although everybody's got one, as I'll come on to in more detail in just a moment, they're not that much use for a course like this because you've got so little manual control, unfortunately. As for these other ones, well, they're lovely and they have various, pros and cons, but we're not really going to go into much depth as to, how this 20-year-old Instamatic camera works or what a GoPro does or what a 5.4 large format camera does. They're merely here to show you that there is really quite a wide range out there. So let's start with the most common, almost ubiquitous camera phone. Pretty much everybody has got these or is familiar with these or in your pocket right now or sitting on the desk in front of you. They work fairly simply, although they're incredibly advanced bits of technology. There will be a lens on the back of the phone. They're still usually fixed lenses nowadays. Occasionally you'll start to see zooms or multiple choice of lenses, but generally you've got one fixed lens. That lens then projects its image onto a tiny, tiny little sensor that's inside the phone. That then projects onto the screen of the phone so that you can see what you're shooting. You can either then take a picture by tapping the phone or by doing various gestures or by pressing a button on the side. The image is then recorded either to a memory card in your phone or to the memory within the phone itself. You then might have software that can let you darken or lighten or do special effects of things, but it's all very self-contained and closed, and of course very, very handy for sharing. It's in your pocket all the time, has lots of advantages. The great thing about camera phones, of course, is they are small, they're portable, and you've usually got one on you. They're also ideally placed to share things with, of course, that's one of their main purposes in fact, so you can get stuff out on social media almost immediately, whereas most of the cameras have some sort of delay involved in doing that. And nowadays they're offering increasingly higher resolutions as well. So if you're outside on a nice bright sunny day, or you're just in a situation where there's a lot of light, you'll be able to produce a very, very decent quality image. Lastly, one of the great things about these camera phones is, of course, for many of us, they're kind of technically free. We pay however much per month for a phone contract, and we get this device for free, making it, well, pretty affordable, really. So what are the downsides? Well, the downsides generally relate to the size of the sensor and the fact you've got a fixed lens. The fact you've got a very small sensor means that everything is in focus, generally speaking. I'm going to come on to this in much more depth later on when we talk about focusing and depth of field. But for now, the fact that the image sensor inside here is probably considerably smaller than my fingernail means that everything is in focus. You can fiddle with that a bit in software. You can, make somebody's eyes sharp and everything else drop out, but effectively you can't escape the fact that it's got an enormous depth of field. The other problem with a small sensor, particularly with cameras nowadays that have very high resolution like this Sony one does, is that they tend to perform very badly in low light. The image quality deteriorates very, very rapidly because you get a lot of what is called noise. Again, we'll come into that more detail later on. The fact there's a fixed lens, although like I say, some cameras now do have a choice of lenses or a zoom lens, that means that you're obviously fixed to one viewpoint. If your camera has a zoom, and some of them do claim to have zooms, what it's actually doing is it's not zooming the lens in at all. It's taking the overall image and the resolution and then cropping into that resolution. Okay, so if you start with, say, 20 million pixels, you'll be losing, millions and millions the more and more you zoom in, and degrading the quality quite a lot. They're not that compatible with other systems, as opposed to DSLRs and the like, where you can change lenses, you can add flash guns, you can have different grips, mounts, you can have all sorts of things attached to them. These, you can obviously get neat little things. You can put them on a tripod, and you can get sort of funny little lens adapters. You can even now get little clip-on lights. They're not really designed to be part of an imaging system. The camera in a phone is kind of a very handy added extra that in recent years has become more and more useful. And the last thing that I personally find infuriating using a camera phone, because I spend my life working on these, is they're actually very, very slow to react a lot of the time. We've all been there where you're smacking away at the screen and it's still having a think and it's still focusing and it's still, oh, I'll take the picture in a moment. And of course that's no use at all for anything where you want to capture that precise moment. So sports or action photography, these can be very limited. Of course on the plus side nowadays, as you know, they can often film at an insane resolution and just pull out the stills you want. But yeah, they're not quite up to speed with these just yet. Now, although you've got lots of software nowadays, lots of apps in camera phones and the phone functionality of it that will let you darken, lighten, adjust colours, play around with this, that and the other, you've actually got very, very little real control when it comes to taking the image in the first place. Certainly the stuff we're going to talk about in this course doesn't really apply to camera phones. When I start talking about exposure modes and things like that, you're a bit out of luck with these because basically it's pretty much all automatic with only a modicum of adjustments you can make yourself. So yeah, whilst these are very, very useful, and like I say, I keep stressing, if you've got one on you, it's still better to have it than not have a camera at all. They're not actually that useful for this course going forward because lots of the technical stuff I'm going to talk about, you can't have any effect on it using one of these. The next type of camera that you'll come across, some of you may already own, is a compact camera or a bridge camera or some sort of mirrorless system. There's a huge variety of these sort of cameras around, so I can't cover every single point. This is one I've owned for about 5 or 6 years. Lovely little thing, fits in my pocket, which, going back to the camera phone thing, is very, very useful. I carry this quite a bit because it's small and portable. It's obviously not as versatile as this beast and has other drawbacks, but the fact it's portable is a big plus. They work a bit more like DSLRs do, but also a bit like camera phones. Obviously you have a lens on the front, you may have a built-in zoom lens, or you may have interchangeable lenses, or it might have just a fixed lens on it. Inside the camera you then have an image sensor. That sensor will then either project onto a screen at the back, so you can see what you're shooting, or you may have what's called an electronic viewfinder attached. You may also want to be able to attach to an external monitor if you're weird, but they don't have mirrors and prisms in them like DSLRs do. You take the picture generally by pressing the shutter, although of course increasingly nowadays they've got touch screens on the back and all sorts of functionality on the touch screen. And the images are then recorded onto a memory card, which is inside the camera, which you can obviously then drop into a computer. Increasingly nowadays, these also have the ability to share via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth quite quickly, but they kind of function as a halfway house between the way DSLRs work and the way camera phones work. Compacts, of course, have the big advantage of being compact. You often get a lot of the functionality and control you get with a larger DSLR, but in something that will fit in your pocket. That can be very, very handy. You often have choice of exposure modes, choice of things like white balance, file format. None of the stuff that is offered in a camera phone, but it's quite common in DSLRs, but in something that, yeah, drops in your pocket. They're also quite expandable, not to quite the same extent that DSLRs are, but you can often get, like I say, interchangeable lenses where you can, do wildlife photography or sports photography if you want to. You might have bigger flashes. You might have things like microphones you can add if you're doing serious video work. They offer much more potential than a camera phone in terms of expanding themselves. They're, I suppose, more affordable, although of course affordable is quite subjective. Cheaper ones have pretty much been done out of the market by the existence of camera phones because it doesn't really seem worth spending £100 on something that's basically no better than a camera phone. And more expensive ones easily get into the territory of the price range of DSLR. But there's still a place, I find, personally, for something that's a few £100 but offers much more than a camera phone can, but isn't as big and as cumbersome to carry around as a DSLR. On the downside, the sensors in these tend to be small, not always, some are now coming out with quite large sensors, but because it's got a small sensor, you've got the same sort of issues you have with the camera phone, whereby you have a lot of depth of field, which you might not always want, and correspondingly, performance in low light often isn't great, certainly not compared to modern DSLRs. Their response time, when you're shooting and trying to react to stuff that's happening quickly, much better than a camera phone. But you'll find it's still nothing compared to a DSLR in terms of how quickly you can respond to a moment and capture the precise thing that's happening. But still, I think they still have a place. Like I said, I still have one. I'm desperately waiting for this to be replaced by the latest and greatest Nikon one, but it's not bloody come out yet. Okay, that's hopefully all fairly self-explanatory. In next week's video, I'm going to talk about mirrorless cameras and DSLR cameras. In the meantime, you know what to do. Subscribe so you get notifications, hit like if you like it, all that sort of thing. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Cheers now. Bye-bye.